Günaydın. Yeniden İstanbul'da olmaktan çok mutluyum. Tekrar davet ettiğiniz için teşekkür ederim. And that's probably the worst Turkish you've ever heard in your life, but I wanted to give it a go. I was practicing all day yesterday. When I was here last time, which was 2 years ago, and I'm always very grateful again to be invited back, I spoke about companies and leadership, the qualities that they were looking for in future-fit business and future-fit leaders. And I talked about creativity, systems thinking, courage, imagination, and innovation. So I was really excited to hear our colleagues at BASF there approaching education in a very innovative way and talking about Leonardo da Vinci, who is one of my heroes. But I'd like to start today by asking you a question. Oh, well, I'll be asking you a question if this button works. Not working. Can you help me out? Oh, here we go. Okay. So does anybody know who this man is? Anyone recognize him? No? This is Socrates, a statue of Socrates. And Socrates had a very strong opinion on what the good life was. For Socrates, it was the examined life. And he spent most of his life, though he wrote none of his wisdom down, in different forums where he lived, asking questions and encouraging difficult conversations. And he held up a mirror in front of people and he made them ask themselves questions about their qualities that they didn't particularly want to look at. And so Socrates wasn't a particularly popular person throughout his lifetime, and his life didn't end particularly well. But I think there is something about Socrates that is very similar to us as sustainability directors. Because inside our organizations, we are always having to ask our colleagues difficult questions and have difficult conversations about how much further we can go and how much faster we can make progress through our innovation programs. And one of perhaps the biggest questions that we have to ask ourselves at the moment is this one. Today, there are 7 billion people on planet Earth, and by 2050, there could be 9 or even 10 billion. Is it possible for 9 billion people to live a good life on planet Earth? And I think you might agree with me that today we haven't created the conditions yet, despite our multiple innovations, for even 7 billion people to live a good life. And it's not that we don't have frameworks. In the last few years, we have some fantastic frameworks that we can work with. We have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We have Stockholm Resilience Centre's planetary boundaries that show us exactly where we need to rein in our impacts on planet Earth and where we need to stop our impact. We have the Paris Climate Agreement. We have the HE biodiversity targets. We are not without frameworks. And yet, I think it's probably true that we're still not moving as fast as we might be able to move. We're still not having those difficult conversations and pressing forward as hard as we want to. And actually, when we talk amongst ourselves, it's not hard for us to express what the future is that we want. It's just hard for us as organizations to get there as fast as we might. And just before I came to Istanbul, I put out on my Facebook page that question, what's the future that you want to see? And I had literally hundreds of responses, and I want to share a few with you today. And I'd like to ask you, even though I won't be able to see you, to put up your hands if you agree with each of these statements. So we want a future where individuals accept the consequences of their actions and don't shift blame onto someone else. Is that the future you want? Be careful if you're sitting next to your boss at the moment when you put your hand up. A pursuit of shared prosperity where success is measured by peace, not by GDP. Would you agree with that one? A world where political decisions take the planetary environment and all other living beings into consideration. Would you agree with that one? I can see some of you would. where companies are created in line with natural capital, where wealth distribution is fair, where health, wellness, and happiness are measured equally to financial wealth. How many of you would agree with that? Okay, I can see some of you would agree with that. So one of the things that I think that we lack in order to push forward as fast as we possibly can are models that help us have difficult conversations around how we can accelerate our innovation for the future. And I'm very lucky in my work that I get to explore many different models of innovation and change. And I'm also lucky in that I don't have a huge ego, so I don't feel that I need to design one of my own. So I get to use other people's all the time. And I get to use the ones that are appropriate for each company that I work with. But sometimes one comes along, like this one that I want to share with you, that can be used in any kind of situation and can give us a completely different perspective on how we innovate and how we look at the future. The Three Horizons model was developed by a man called Bill Sharp, who lives in the wilds of Scotland. And it gives us a way of looking at the future that is completely different from the way in which we currently innovate today, which is instead of backcasting, we use a process of forecasting. So at any given time, when we're looking at the future and thinking about innovation, there are three different horizons, three different perspectives that we can take a look at. And the first of these is the horizon that we call business as usual. And that is the model of how we do things today, the current existing systems within which our society and our business are orchestrated. But there's something about this particular horizon that we think is no longer fit for purpose, is not taking us towards the future that we want. And it contains the seeds of its own demise, and over time, it will decline. And this is what we think of as the degenerative and divisive economy that we see in the world today. The second horizon, or the third horizon, and I'll come to that first, is the horizon of transformative innovation. And that is about building the future that we want. What is the future that we want to emerge, and how can we help it arrive well? And the third horizon is perhaps the most interesting horizon for us in business, which is the horizon of disruptive innovation. And disruptive innovation can be anything. For us, often, it is technology, like the mobile phone, which has disrupted our lives considerably. It can also be a political event, like Brexit in my home country, or possibly your elections that have just taken place in the municipalities here in Turkey. It can be an extreme weather event, like we have recently seen in Madagascar. But there are two important things about this horizon. When we are innovating towards the future, what we have to be careful of is that our innovations are not captured by business as usual, and that they are, in fact, innovations that help the future that we want to emerge. This particular horizon is the horizon that I most associate with entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial culture that we have inside our organizations. And it's very difficult for entrepreneurs to succeed. Most entrepreneurial businesses fail, and the reason that they fail is because they are captured by the current systems. Let's have a look at an example. So most of you will be familiar with Uber. Uber used the mobile phone to disrupt the taxi industry and disrupted it very successfully. The other company that you can see is a company called Clever Shuttle, which is a German company. Now, the way in which Uber operated is, despite the fact that it was disrupting its industry, it used the financial and employment models of our existing business as usual, which was very punitive for its employees. And so it did not deliver the future that we want. It was captured by business as usual. And so the future that we want, an open, inclusive economy, did not emerge. By contrast, Clever Shuttle operates a model which is the sharing economy, treats its employees very well, and uses electric vehicles. So its model allows the future to emerge. Novozymes, who is one of the Sustainable Brands family members, is very different to Uber. It produces some of the smallest products in the world, enzymes, and they are used to help companies like Levi Strauss use less water in its dyeing process. Ampelman is a company you may not have heard of. It's one of the fastest growing brands in Holland. It designed a multi-directional platform that helps people and products access wind turbines safely in any kind of sea conditions. It's designed to help the future that we want emerge. But it has been captured also by the oil and gas industry, which is the future we want to decline, because clearly they also have safety issues at seas. So in those two cases, the future that we want still emerges, but they enable the current existing business model to continue longer than we would like it to. The three main questions that we're asking ourselves when we use this model is, how can we assist the safe exit without disrupting our organization's stability of business as usual? How can we help to give birth to the regenerative future that is open, green, and inclusive? And how can we build innovation bridges to the future that we want? We can also use this model to run workshops and ask many difficult questions along each line. And I encourage and invite any of you to come to the workshop that we will be running tomorrow. An important final question to think about when we're designing innovation is, instead of using forecasting, which is using the current systems within which we operate and imagining how they are going to arrive in the future, by instead starting with designing the future that we want, and then using a process that is the reverse of forecasting, which is backcasting to the present. And there are 4 key steps that we use when we're doing this. The first is activating the vision for the future that we want, articulating where it is that we want to get to. Then we come back to the present and look at and activate the gap analysis that we're all familiar with using. It's then time to start activating our creative thinking to come up with solutions that step by step will take us towards the future that we want, and then activate the priorities that will keep our companies safe and innovative and continuing towards the future that we want. And we must do that within key principles of sustainability that we have had with us for some time, but it's quite easy to step away from when you're working in the process of innovation. And they are that in a sustainable society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing concentrations of substances from the Earth's crust, such as fossil CO2, heavy metals, and minerals. We look at that we should not have concentrations of substances produced by society, so concentrations of substances like antibiotics and endocrine disruptors. That we should not be degrading by physical means any part of the planet, from deforestation to soil degradation to plastic pollution in the oceans and to draining of groundwater tables. And that we should make sure that in our society there are no structural obstacles to people's health, influence, competence, impartiality, or meaning. And yesterday I spent a fantastic day in Istanbul writing a story which is very important for me to publish about Turkey, because I think in my home country we don't always publish positive stories about Turkey. So I spent time talking to many different parts of the Syrian community, 4 million people, to write a story that I think is very important to tell about how Turkey's incredible welcoming and hospitality has managed to absorb 4 million people that arrived from absolutely nowhere out of the blue. And I think the fantastic stories have emerged from that about how in Turkey we are trying hard to create a society where there are no structural obstacles to people's health, influence, competence, impartiality, and meaning. So tomorrow I'm running a little workshop using these 2 models on how we can design a regenerative Istanbul. And I did invite the mayor of Istanbul to come and join us. But he wrote kindly back to me to explain 2 weeks ago that he wasn't sure if he would still be the mayor of Istanbul. And apparently today, he's still no longer sure that he is the mayor of Istanbul. So he won't be joining us tomorrow. I look forward to doing that with you, and thank you for inviting me once again today.
Thank you so much, Jenny, in terms of sharing something that's incredibly important. How do we look at innovation in a new way? And it was really insightful to know that let's stop the old practices. Let's not look to statistics and look the old way, but actually look to designing the innovation we want. So one thing I'm curious about is, what do you think is one of the main barriers to adopting this approach in an organization?
I think one of the main barriers is actually having difficult conversations. I think that within hierarchical organizations, where there's sometimes still command and control culture, it's very difficult for individuals to be brave enough to put forward the creative suggestions and push, particularly in the sustainability department, push hard enough for the advances that we want at the speed that we want. So I think courage and creating a culture where innovation and creativity and imagination flourishes is really important.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very
Give
much.
Jenny a round of applause. Thank you.